Thank you very much. Welcome to Hill West. Before we go any further, I want to make a special mention that tonight, after 25 years of recording concerts for Cable 19, Mr. Gordon Hampson is recording his final concert here as he'll be retiring at the end of this school year. Thank you, Mr. Hampson, for all you've done for the district. Just to change things up a little bit, I decided to take the Symphonic Band and Wind Ensemble and put them all together to play it. A lot of this more popular music. Strike Up the Band is a neat piece by George Gershwin, well arranged by Paul Jennings. The next piece, if you are James Bond fans, as you know, I'm sure you know by now that I am a big film score fan, so any kind of music that goes along with films or TV and the like is stuff that I kind of like, so they get subjected to having to play it, but they like it too. So we're going to play a James Bond suite that's in 4 movements. Covers the James Bond theme, Live and Let Die, by Paul McCartney. For Your Eyes Only, which features Mike Shimchick on trumpet. And finally with Goldfinger. Please hold your applause until the end of the 4th movement. Thank you very much. James Bond suite. This concert's always a nice one because the end of the school year is near. But that's good and bad. It's good because everybody gets a little bit of a break, but it's also bittersweet in that we have to say goodbye to seniors. This is their last concert performance on this stage, and we always like to recognize them for their efforts throughout the years here at West and their dedication to our program. So I would like to go through the list and name all of our seniors, and if you could hold your applause to the end, and they please stand and remain standing when I call their name. Stand, that's where you get up off the chair. Stand. Okay, these are the seniors for 2006. Rebecca Rowland, Min Jung, Andy Zagorin, Alan Latta, Dan Jones, Steve Marcos, Mike Shimchick, and Adam Barber. That is it, am I correct? The seniors, 2006. Each year also, we give out the John Philip Sousa Band Award. It's in recognition of outstanding achievement and interest in instrumental music for singular merit and loyalty and cooperation, and for displaying those high qualities of conduct that school instrumental music requires. The recipient this year of the John Philip Sousa Band Award is presented to Dan Jones. At the end of the concert, all of the seniors also will receive a plaque that has Cherry Hill High School West music and has their name and the groups that they were in. So each of the seniors will be receiving this plaque as well. So one more nice round of applause for our seniors who are moving on. The last piece that we're going to play by ourselves is a salute to American jazz. Those of you that follow music or have studied music know that the two most important contributions to the music world as far as the United States is concerned would be jazz and rock and roll. So this is a salute to American jazz, arranged by Sammy Nestica, who actually used to arrange for the Count Basie band. He was a saxophone player. A lot of great jazz charts, but every once in a while he goes over into the band medium and tries something. And this is a lot of outstanding American pieces of jazz, including A Night Tunisia, St. Louis Blues, It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing, and Birdland. So sit back and enjoy this one. we're going to perform the Levitation first and the West Side Story at last. Now, Levitation, one of the things I want to explain a little bit about the orchestra is that over the last 2 years, I've tried to rid them of their squareness. String players are not accustomed necessarily to playing jazz and swinging and letting their collars down. You know, they're very stiff. They play in that classical music all the time, which is okay, which is a lot of fun, and that's great. But I want them to experience all types of music, so I've given them a few pieces of jazz to try to play. This thing, Levitation, we're actually going to hear some improvisational solos. Jill Yastrzemski, Joe Falcone, Katie Rizzo, and then you'll have the one guy that actually will sound like he knows what he's doing on a string. That's Josh Curry on bass, but he's a bass player and plays in jazz bands, so that's not really fair. And Ian Copperthwaite will jump over here and play on the vibes a little bit during the improvisation section. So, improvisation is playing a solo spontaneously and creatively. See that if I'd have taken IB when I was in school, I'd have known how to say that. So anyway, this is Levitation, jazz improvisation on string instruments. forgot to mention also, we added on drums Cal Earthman and on piano Susan Brennan. If you're sitting over here, you can't see Susan because she's right here. Our next piece is called Jazz Suite Number 2. I'm not sure what Jazz Suite Number 1 was, but this is Jazz Suite Number 2. We're going to play, it's a 4 movement piece. We're going to play 2 of the movements, the Bossa Nova movement and the 5-4-3-4. And this will feature Ian again on vibraphone and also on flute, one of our outstanding freshman flute players, Christian Kufel. I would like to recognize at this time the senior members of the string orchestra. Seems like some of them have been here forever. And some very talented and very dedicated young people that I'm sorry to see, I wish they could stay here till I retire. But unfortunately, they have to move on. However, it has been a pleasure to work with them over these years, these 4 years. Some great moments with Jen, Michelle, and Katie, and Elaine, Sina, and Josh. And one of the things we're going to play at the end is a West Side Story medley. And I know from looking back to one of the highlights of my teaching career, as well as hopefully maybe their high school career, was the pit orchestra that we played with West Side Story, because that was a phenomenal musical experience. However, moving on, our 2006 seniors, I didn't bring my program, so I have to wing this, but I'll start over on the far side. Out on the end, outstanding jazz bassist and string bassist who's moving on to the University of Arts in Philadelphia next fall, Josh Curry. A young lady in the back of the bass section, 4 years here, Sina Rainey. A young lady who I believe was in South Jersey all 4 years. She was in high school, is that correct? On cello, Katie Rizzo. Over to the back here, sitting in the back of the first violin section, whose hair is shorter because she got it cut by Katie, Elaine Pang. Front row, second from the front, known as Yaz. It's a lot easier to say, but Michelle Yastremski. And a young lady who is one of the finest high school musicians I've ever had the privilege of being around. I have a trumpet student who I had who's now playing freelance in New York City, went to Juilliard, and he was a phenomenal talent. But Jen is not that far away from him. Her talent-wise, she's moving on to Temple, both violin-wise and vocal-wise. But it has been my pleasure and privilege to work with her, the outstanding young lady that she is, both as a musician and as a person, Jen Horn. So, which brings us to a few awards. The first is the Instrumentalist Magazine Musicianship Award. It reads, in recognition of outstanding musicianship and distinguished musical contributions, the Instrumentalist Magazine Musicianship Award is conferred upon Katie Rizzo. And the other two awards are both, this is the National School Orchestra Award. It's in recognition of singular merit and outstanding contributions to the success of the school orchestra for displaying an unusual degree of loyalty and cooperation, and for exemplifying that high standard of conduct that is the aim of the school instrumental program. And these two awards are conferred upon Michelle Yastremski and Jennifer Horn. And our last piece is a medley of a West Side Story pieces. You can see where they are. We're going to add on this Tom Holroyd and Kyle Earthman on percussion. And the arrangement came in, and I liked it, but I didn't like it. So I added a beginning and an ending to make it a little more feasible and put a little bit more into it. So this is some selections from West Side Story. This started out as just the Star Wars and Across the Stars. I ordered the arrangement, it came in, I looked at it, and didn't like it. I liked the beginning and I liked the middle, and I just hated the way it ended, because it ended, you'll see there's a spot where it gets real soft and it just kind of ends. And for putting this many kids on stage, and that is really short, it was too short and it just wasn't exciting enough for me. So, decided to turn it into a whole sci-fi suite and added the 20th Century Fox theme at the beginning, right into the Star Wars, and then two of my favorite pieces of music, Flying from E.T. and the Back to the Future theme. So I threw that in at the end to make it a little bit more exciting. So this is a combination effort of Jerry Brubaker and myself. I hope he doesn't come looking for me for royalties on this. So this is a sci-fi suite. Before I do go on, it's been an outstanding year for me. This is has to be one of my favorite years of teaching, because your sons and daughters really make it worthwhile coming to work every day, just by the way they conduct themselves in class, the way they play their instruments, as talented as they are. And it's just a lot of fun to come to work every day. And as I said, I will miss the seniors, because it's not a large group of seniors, which is good, because we have a lot of people coming back next year, but it is a lot of talented seniors. So, without further ado, this is Sci-Fi Suite, and this will be exciting. We played this yesterday. It was really good. I hope we repeat that tonight. Okay, the next piece of music, in my AP music theory class and music theory class, we've been talking about a little bit of music history here, and we've been talking about program music and music that describes or is descriptive. And actually this goes back to ancient Greece, when the allos, which was an instrument kind of like a early oboe, can imagine that it was just pretty awful. But what they did was in the Pythian games, this is like around 586 BC, they actually had contests of allos players that competed much like the discus or the 100-yard dash in the Olympics. And Sacidas won that, by the way, in case you're wondering. But this piece of music is descriptive in that Bob Mintzer, who now is with the brain dead, sorry, 40s moment. Forget it. Anyway, this piece of music called Computer. Mintzer tries to use with music, and the jazz band specifically, describing the inner workings of a computer, like taking these instruments and trying to describe what a computer would sound like in the inside as it's processing information. But, as all machines do, it breaks down. And in the end, he just yanks the cord out, and the computer is done. So when you get to the end of this piece of music, what you have to do is you'll hear there's a stop time where all the rhythm, stop time means the rhythm stops playing and just the horns play. You learned something tonight. And at that point in time, they'll be playing it'll sound like something's processing, and then all of a sudden it'll just cut short. That means man has triumphed over machine. Before we play our final selection for this evening, I'd like to recognize first I want to do is thank a very important person, a person who really helps me out a lot here when it comes time for concerts. And, you know, if I ask for something, he pretty much says okay, and that's Mr. Kevin Frost and his crew. They do a great job here. Thanks, Kevin. Let's see, our senior members of the jazz ensemble, most of them, well, they should have flowers on, but some of them looks like they took them off, they lost them. Oh, there we go, fell off. That figures. Front row, we have only one senior in the front row, Mr. Jan Jones. Really exciting thing is there are no seniors in the second row and a few trombones coming up next year, so we have 4 or 5 trombones back.